I'm Megan Leigh.
And I'm Nicole Danielle.
And this is Romance on the Rocks, where two bookish biddies imbibe and enjoy romance novels. And this time around, we're doing werewolf smut, you guys.
In honor of the full moon and the lunar eclipse.
Exactly. Well, is it the blood moon too? I can't remember.
No, it's a worm moon.
Worm moon.
Yes.
Worm moon. Okay, I knew it was something. But yeah, we decided to throw this extra special one out there with werewolves, and it was a read, I'll say that.
Any trigger warnings before we dive into the novels?
No, actually, no. Shockingly enough, I had no idea what to expect, but I will say there are no trigger warnings for my book. How about yours?
Some sexual assault and general assault. So what are you drinking tonight, Megan? The important question.
I decided, because I couldn't find a beverage listed in my book, that I was just going to go with something werewolfish. So this is a pina colada, because as the Warren Zevon song says, I saw a werewolf drinking a pina colada.
I have never heard of that song.
You have, though. You just don't know that you have.
Okay.
I saw a werewolf drinking a pina colada. Yeah, no, you definitely. Werewolves of London. Werewolves of London. And I told Adam, my husband, I told Adam that I was reading a book about the werewolves of Scotland, and he instantaneously went into the song. And I'm like, dude, I already bought my pina colada. We're totally thinking the same thing. So, all right, anybody else who knows that song, go ahead and write to me and tell me that you're on board. Nicole's giving me a look like she has no idea what I'm talking about. What did you decide to drink tonight?
I found a lovely dark side red blend wine from Seven Moons Winery.
That's a pretty label.
Yeah, it's got all the different moon phases on it. And it's the dark side red. There was a regular red, but I was like, oh, we got to go dark side.
Absolutely. And for those of you at home, this label has like a red background and the moons are just sticking out beautifully. It's very pretty.
Yeah. You know me, I like to shop by the label.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, I feel like we both did pretty well for our beverages. That's good. Shall we just jump right in?
Yeah. What did you read, Megan? Tell me about your wolf smut.
So I decided to tie together all of the themes that we've been doing. So we were just getting out of our Scottish-Irish themes. And since we are still recording this in the same month, I decided I would go with werewolves and Scotland. So mine is called The Wolf Wore Plaid. And
I love it.
The basic premise of this book is that there is a Hollywood director and a main cast coming over from America to film a time travel romance/adventure movie at the McQuarrie Castle. And just a sneak peek, my next Scottish-Irish book that I will be reading for the podcast is a time travel romance. So in my head, when I was envisioning this, I actually saw this movie that they were filming as the next book that we're going to be talking about. So it kind of made it even more fun. There's bound to be trouble because the McQuarries and the Kilpatricks have had these ongoing clan battles. The Kilpatricks had wanted this film to happen at their castle, and the McQuarries got the contract instead. So the Kilpatricks are hell-bent on sabotaging this production because they feel like it should have been theirs. According to the book, there have always been issues with the clans, not just these two. To quote the book, the battle between the clans had been going on forever, stealing cattle, horses, bridges, land, brides, fighting for more power since the beginning. The quest for more land and power had been an ongoing condition.
This sounds very similar to my upcoming book with bride stealing and all kinds of other Scottish elements. I love this. Yes. It's all tying in together.
It is. And I have a couple more tie-ins. So I'm going to be doing almost like spoilers for our upcoming podcast. So yeah, this has been going on. So right now, that biggest feud is the McQuarries and McNeils on one side versus the Kilpatricks and the McKinleys on the other. I'm going to tell you this was difficult for me because everybody has a McSomething type of name for the most part. So the main ones, McQuarries, McNeils, McKinleys, Kilpatricks. But there were also the Camerons, McDonalds, McPhersons, McNabs. And these are all names that are thrown into the book at some point in time. And so I actually went through and kept highlighting all the names because I'm like, I need to keep track of these people. Part of the overall film contract has the McQuarrie and McNeil clans providing much of the security, extras, appropriate props and costumes, horses, and wolves for the movie, because we are not left to guess if these are werewolves. We know right away. Like from page 1, we know that we are working with werewolf clans. So the wolves are very clearly just going to be werewolves that are hanging out in wolf form. So they look like they're well trained, but they're just folk, hanging out and acting for the movies. Early on, we are introduced to Heather McNeil. We find out that her potential mate, Timothy, died in a fight with some of the Kilpatrick clansmen. But the fight was ultimately Timothy's fault. So there's not much anybody can do about it. It just kind of shows that he was a hothead and didn't make the best decisions. Because of this, she's coming out of a period of mourning and feels like people don't necessarily even trust her judgment or her ability to be reliable. Quote the book, "She felt as though she was being judged for his actions, that selecting him for her mate said the same about her." So she's recently opened up this local restaurant and bakery, which has found tremendous success. She's been surprising people with that success and dedication, because people have been thinking of her as a wild card and a risk taker. And she's been tasked with catering the food for the cast and crew. And she is also going to be providing coordination for the local female extras. So she is highly involved.
And quite the multitasker.
All of these folks are. In fact, in one part of the book, when we're talking about the male protagonist, Heather, who we just met, brings up the fact that she thinks he's got way too much on his plate and that, the people in charge have given him way too much to do. But it sounds like, since this is kind of like a family and clan business, everybody's super involved with everything, and they really want to be. So they're kind of everywhere all the time. So we are then quickly introduced to that leading man, Enric McQuarrie. He's the second in command of his clan. The filming is taking place in his castle, so not only has he been put in charge of general security, but he will also be performing as an extra in the battle scenes. Heather has always had a thing for Enric. They kind of grew up together. His family, her family, and her brothers are about Enric's age, and it doesn't sound like they're too far apart in age either, like, maybe 3 years, something like that. So they were always together as kids. She's always had a thing for him. She always just assumed she wasn't his cup of tea, though. He had plenty of opportunities to make a move, never did. They're now probably in their late 20s at this point. So hence her ending up with Timothy in the first place. Enric has always had a thing for Heather, but spent years convincing himself that they are not suited for each other, because he's fairly responsible, business-focused, and again, she keeps being described throughout the book as unpredictable, impulsive, wild card. Quote the book, "She was a free spirit, and he would have wanted to rein her in if they had courted."
Oh.
So, yeah. And so, but I gotta say, I almost took this to his benefit, which was he liked her the way she was. And so he didn't think it was appropriate for him to date her, because he would have wanted that to change and didn't think that would be appropriate for him to ask her to change, if
Gotcha.
that makes sense.
It
like
does.
When I first read it,
yeah,
I highlighted it and I'm like, oh, and then I reread it. And as I went through the book, I'm like, no, actually, it makes a lot of sense. It seems like he's saying, I wouldn't want to change who she is.
Okay.
But each of the clans is pushing for the two of them to get together. Everybody seems to see that this is appropriate, and the two of them just remain resistant. All the inner monologue is them having the hots for each other and then talking themselves out of it, basically. Majority of the book just focuses on the ins and outs of making the film at the castle. The leading actor in the film is Guy McNabb, so it's one of those Mick names that enters here. Apparently he is an extremely handsome actor. He's sought after as an American heartthrob. And our Enric looks an awful lot like him. So, of course, they start using Enric as a body double in the film.
Oh, because he doesn't have enough to do already.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Like, these people all have so much on their plates, right? So he's now body doubling for anything that's a little bit too dangerous, because the original body double apparently got too sloshed at a bar, got in a fight, and they fired him. But we continue having this theme of sabotage throughout. Like there's a lot that happens with the sabotage and things that could have resulted in major injuries or death. So it's a lot of trying to just keep that under control. Enric finally starts to court Heather in earnest. And what I think is interesting is when he first asks her out on a date, he comes up and he basically says, let's do it. Let's have a first date. But in his head, he's saying, we're having a first date to prove to everybody that having a date can be platonic. And I'm like, nah, that's not how that works, dude. Right? And then on her end, instead of her hearing, like, let's go on a date and being excited because he's finally asking her out, her response in her head is also basically, it's too bad it's not a real date. And I'm like, he didn't tell you what his inner monologue was. How are you both coming up with the fact that this isn't a real date?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Doesn't matter. It was a really lovely date.
What did they do on their date, Meghan?
So they went out to this lovely dinner. They were watching the sunset. And when they went into the restaurant, Enric parked at the inn and she felt elated and special as he escorted her inside to get the table. She couldn't believe he'd actually made reservations. And I thought that was, it was like he planned ahead. He was very thoughtful. And the number of times you and I have gone on dates with people where you feel like everything is an afterthought. And it was like, so I thought that was very nice.
Reservations are huge.
Exactly. Especially for something where both of them are pretending like this is just a nothing. He clearly means it. And there's a lot of stuff like that throughout the book, and that's going to come back when I do romantic reminders. So yeah, that is kind of that part of it. And I'm not really going to go much more into the rest of the plot of the book. We're just going to leave it there. Let's just talk about stuff.
Let's start with your spicy Scoville scale. How would you spicy rank this? Is it a Scotch bonnet?
I could give it a Scotch bonnet or maybe even a habanero. There were some definitely intimate scenes, but it was a really interesting dynamic, which is kind of why I was going into the I have thoughts. I've never read a werewolf romance, and I'm really interested to hear how mine compares to yours from the tropes that are within it. Since I haven't read one, I'm not sure what to expect, and I don't know if this is a standout or if this is really common. So it icks me out that they keep talking about mating, and I'm sure that that is a thing in all of these werewolf romances. But every time they say things like, you know, he wanted to mate her, all I hear is the word, excuse me, I just hear fuck. So I just hear he really wanted to fuck her. And I kept trying to clear that from my mind and use the word marry instead. Like he really wanted to marry her because wolves mate for life. And so
I was going to say penguins mate for life.
Yeah. So wolves mate for life. And that's definitely part of this book series, if not all wolf book series. I don't know, since this is the only one I've read. So the whole thing about he would want to mate her is basically him saying he wants to marry her and get her off the market. But my brain couldn't deal with it. It just was icked out. And what made it even more difficult was the public nature of it. So, quote, Heather could imagine her brothers giving Enric fits for not just mating her first. I'm sorry, your brothers would do what? Because he didn't F you? I'm sorry, marry you? What? Your brothers are going to be like, why didn't you do her? That was just difficult for me to deal with.
That's interesting. Okay.
Followed by, so this is after they've been out on their date or two. They definitely like each other. They have spent some naked time together, but there was no intercourse. There was a lot of other stuff, but no intercourse. So now we're a little bit further in the book, and Enric says, I had hoped you would be agreeable to mating, and you would stay here with me through the end of filming. So basically he's like, I think it's supposed to be like proposing marriage. Would you be agreeable to screw me so we can be together forever? And then lastly, they make it official. They are now mates, and they go down to breakfast the next day. And again, remember, this is a film set, and everybody's like there ready to film. So they all have to get their big breakfast in the cafeteria or whatever and then head out. So they come down together, and all of her family's there, all of his family's there, and they have to like basically announce their engagement after they've mated. And so he asks her when she wants to tell her family, and she's like, let's just do it now. And they walk over to the other cafeteria table, and she just announces to her brothers and everybody at the table, it's done. No need to guess about it. Followed by
so romantic.
Everyone hooted and hollered at the head of the table, making everyone eating breakfast in the great hall turn and clap. So it's like you walk into a room and you're like, hey guys, we screwed. And then everybody goes, yay!
A round of applause. So
I thought, like, okay, I like the concept where it's like he's basically propositioning her to be his wife, but it's just in such an awkward context that was difficult for me through the book. I can understand if other people are able to get past that language, because honestly, of most of the books we've read, when I look at the dates he's putting together for her, when I look at the care she's giving him, they're very thoughtful, and they're trying to almost one-up each other to show the other person how much they care. And after they get together, it's just a lot of her thinking he is the most handsome. I'm so lucky. I'm so glad I've got him. Him looking at her and thinking, nobody else here compares. I'm so lucky. So glad I have her. Can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her. It's very wholesome, but surrounded by these things that just make me uncomfortable language-wise. So, yeah, whatever.
Any foods?
Yeah. She's a baker. And one of the things she's known for are these meat pies. So if you would like to make me a venison and cranberry pie, I don't know. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be a venison pie and a cranberry pie or a venison and cranberry pie. I don't know. I don't want the cranberries in there. There's also something called a bridie. Bridies, bridies. They're like Scottish Hot Pockets smothered in brown sauce.
Yeah.
So there was that. I also, just a handful of things here. I also had a lot of mentions, and am I going to get this right? Skendu. There were so many of those in the book. Okay, a sneak peek for those folks who are going to be listening to the next one. Nicole teaches us how to say and spell Skendu.
That's actually the last episode.
Was it?
Yeah.
See, not a sneak peek. Y'all know already. But my book now had so many swords. There were so many swords. There were just a lot of things in this book that were interesting. And like I said, the dates were very, very sweet. I had a couple more quotes that I'd like to throw out there.
Yeah.
I thought you would appreciate this. This was after they'd been doing all the dating and they decided that they were going to be together. And she says, I'm all for giving up the dating game, but I want to keep doing things like this because it's important to show we care about each other no matter what else is going on in our lives. I love you, and I always have. And
I like that.
Isn't that nice? It was just kind of like, even though we've decided we're together, let's keep doing these like kind of dating things to support the other.
I like
that. Was nice. And then she loved the way he made love to her, slowly, sensually, not just with the purpose of having sex, but making a deeper connection, showing her he truly loved her, a joining that would make them feel as one, complete.
Very nice.
Right?
Very nice.
So despite the language that I don't like, I liked their relationship. I also have a list for you, and I don't know if this will help you in your search for the meow, but there were several words here. Okay. So get ready.
Give me your words.
Okay. You've got her feminine folds.
Ooh, folds. Yes.
Uh-huh. Followed by her feminine core. We've got her wet sheath. And finally, Mons. M-O-N-S. Those were all big part of this book in case you would like to take any of those and run with them.
Ponder on core some more. That doesn't repel me.
Her feminine core and her feminine folds. Those are
I'm not taking folds, but
you're not taking
I'll
the folds?
consider core.
Feminine flaps. Oh, no.
No, not gonna do it for me.
I'm sorry to hear that.
A couple of quick questions as I'm listening to you talk about your book, because you're kind of asking, like, what are these trends with these werewolf smuts, right?
Yeah, because I don't know if I'm in or out of those trends, like if this is very common or if this is an unusual, because I know, like, same for like vampires and witches. I know there are some things that are very accepted, and then there are other books you read and you're like, well, that's weird and new.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure that out too, because this is definitely my first foray into the werewolf smut. So my first question is, were there any mentions of alphas or alpha males?
Yes, but I think not as much as probably some other books. And I'm only taking that off of the weird advertisements we get when we scroll through our Facebook, where they show some sort of enormous pectoral wolf and it says, the alpha claimed her for his mate. My book didn't have anything quite like that. Like every once in a while I'd be like, well, those were only betas in the pack. So if they had, acted on the alpha's direction, then they could be forgiven. It was more of just a, like, your manager says that you need to do a thing. You know what I mean? It didn't seem like a sexuality thing so much as just like a hierarchy, if that makes sense.
And then my next question for you is, with the becoming mates item, were there any rituals attached to that?
No.
Okay.
No, none at all.
Interesting.
Okay. Unless walking down to the table and announcing to your brothers that you just got screwed. That's part of the ritual.
Hey, I don't know, man. We don't kink shame Meghan.
No, there was none of that. That's why I said I would love to know how much of my book is common and not. And another thing to mention, well, maybe two things. But first off, you and I have had a number of books now where we start in the middle of the series and we don't necessarily realize we're doing it at the time.
Or start the first book and not realize you have
that
to
it
read
is a
more.
Series.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure this was going to be part of a series. It even does say on the back, thank you to this particular book for actually saying praise for the Highland Wolf series. So it's like, this is part of a series.
Yes.
Thank you. Because the last book I read, which is upcoming, did not say that. So I had no idea it was part of a series. This one could stand on its own. You definitely can tell that there are characters that you would have met in other books, but I didn't need to have known them. I do wonder if I had read any of the other books, if the wild card and unpredictability of Heather would have been more apparent to me, because it seemed like something they just kept saying about her that wasn't really true. So I'm curious if I had read other books, if I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember her character doing this thing or being a free spirit, whatever. But I didn't need any of that, which was appreciated. That I could read these out of order and that it still made sense.
Yeah.
Unrelated to any of that, one of the sabotage things I have a question about, and I'm hoping maybe you will have an answer for. You're a baker, you're a food person, you cook. One of the forms of sabotage was somebody trying to come down and alter the food that would be served to people. And I don't want to say poison it necessarily, because they didn't use poison. They were going to dump salmonella into the food. My question to you, I know how most people would get salmonella, which would be with raw chicken or fresh eggs sometimes, but you can't guarantee that just because you slapped a piece of raw chicken that there is salmonella. How do you procure salmonella to dump it into something?
My best uneducated guess would be to actually take chicken shit and maybe make it into like a slurry or something.
Would you know for sure that it was salmonella then? That's my point. I really couldn't figure that out, where they were like, oh, she was dumping salmonella into the stew.
Unless you got some kind of lab-made strain or something. Yeah.
And how are you getting this? Where in what website, what dark website are you going to be like, I would like to buy salmonella,
Are they just letting like some uncooked chicken juice sit in room temperature in a baggie? Like, what are they doing?
Right. And then again, how are you guaranteeing that that's what it is? And you dump it in this giant thing of stew and think that your baggie of chicken juice is going to get, I don't know. It was a really odd thing. I thought you guys could have used like an herb or something that was like a guaranteed this will give everybody,
some kind
diarrhea.
of irritant or something. Yeah.
But I don't understand that. Okay, whatever. I just wasn't sure if that was something that you had ever heard of. All right, put it in the category of pellagra because I'm
good
so
old
confused.
pellagra.
I'm confused.
For those of you who may be new to the podcast, pellagra appeared in season 1, episode 1.
Yeah.
The Power to Heal was the episode where we dealt with this weird disease. And I won't get into it beyond that because I feel like we talk about pellagra way too much since
We
that
do.
episode.
Because it's still a fun word that we're still not sure we're saying correctly. But all I'm going to say is salmonella and pellagra, they can be siblings right now.
You know what, though, now, Megan? Every time I see the word nixtamalization, I instantly think of pellagra, and my vocabulary has just increased exponentially thanks to this podcast.
Nicole, SEO does not like that we use big words. So
I know.
You need to watch your mouth.
Oh, my God,
Watch
you guys.
your mouth.
The SEO, every time I put a new post or whatever on the website, I get this warning from Yoast SEO or whatever it is. Think about your audience. Your vocabulary may be too high. We're like, screw off.
Our audience is literate. These people know how to read. They
Right.
know how to speak and write a sentence. They can deal with words.
Also, I'm not going to dumb shit down. God, that's insulting.
Yeah, for ourselves and for you guys.
Yeah.
You don't need that.
And what kills me is it happens when I don't even put in fancy words. And I'm like, what are we dealing with here?
Well, I think that brings me to a close.
Okay.
I think I got all my things here. So
All right.
we'll just move forward.
Yeah, I read Meghan, behold this girthy werewolf smut.
Oh man, yours is definitely girthier than mine. Mine was about 300 pages. What do you got going on there?
Oh, girl, this is like 600, 700, 600-ish pages.
Wow.
I'm going to tell you, though, there are 3 separate books within this one book.
Okay, that makes more sense. That means that your book is closer to on par with mine.
I freaked out Bob, though, because I decided I was going to read the last story in the collection of 3. And I read it in one afternoon, which honestly, it was a very fast read, even though that was the longest story in the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
But Bob was freaking out. He's like, how the did you read that so fast? He's like, I can't read that fast. I'm like, baby, no. I just read like the last third of it.
Yeah.
So this is Growl, is the name of the collection. And we have some wolf eyes, and we have a couple getting it on the front of it. So there you go. But the particular story that I read was called The Alpha's Woman.
Ooh.
By A.C. Arthur. And I'm going to just hit on a little bit who A.C. Arthur is, because this was kind of intriguing to me. She is a paralegal and has been for a long time. And she loves writing romance novels. She writes contemporary and paranormal romances and writes under her own name as well as a pen name, Lacey Baker.
Okay.
2 of her books under her pen name have been turned into Hallmark movies.
Are they also paranormal and
No.
werewolves? Oh,
No.
okay. I was going to say that seems very not.
These are very
Hallmark.
mainstream green pepper, milk and cookies romances.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is called A Gingerbread Romance. And I think I've actually seen that one, believe it or not, on Hallmark Channel.
Oh, I believe it.
You believe it. Meghan has not.
Nope.
And the other one is Christmas in Evergreen, Bells Are Ringing. And so I was like, that is so intriguing. She has like a dual split personality thing going on here. She's got one side that writes these wholesome, hallmarky things. And then she has the werewolf paranormal side where things get wild.
Nice.
This was published in 2015. I scored this book at the Second and Charles secondhand bookstore that I was telling you about in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
It's so huge. It was so overwhelming, but I scored this and I instantly read it. And I didn't mean to read this because I was really needing to read my next book, The Border Lord's Bride. I hadn't even started it, Meghan, and I went ahead. I was like, I'm just going to flip through this little werewolf smut and see what things are about. And then I couldn't put it down. I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, oh my God, this is a wild ride.
I'm so excited to hear about it. Oh, tell me the deets.
Okay, it was super quick. It was a delightful and spicy werewolf romp set in contemporary times. You have Kira Radney, an alpha female werewolf from a group of werewolves known as hunters. She's a college graduate, and she's very intelligent. Blaez is an alpha male werewolf descended from the original werewolves and part of a group of lycans known as the Devoted. He's retired military, but still does some black ops type stuff on the side. So Kira is essentially the heir to her pack. Her mother has taught her to be an alpha female so she can partner with an alpha male and lead a new pack or her existing pack once her parents are no longer able to. But in a twist, her mother was recently killed, and there's some mysterious situations involved with that. And her father is suddenly trying to pawn her off on a beta male and even lets her get physically assaulted by some of the pack members. And later, it's really bizarre. And then one of them later tries to sexually assault her, but she ain't putting up with that shit. And she fights back and takes the guy out essentially and escapes. What I appreciated was I didn't have to get all the gross details about this stuff. It was just explained in 1 to 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. And the book starts off with she has just fought off her attacker and now she's packing up and hitting the road because she ain't sticking around for this shit. So she's decided she's going to be a lone wolf until she can find her mother's family out in the Midwest. Before she can get there, though, she runs into Blaez, who finds her on his pack's lands. Apparently, there's this thing with werewolves where they all get really horny the closer it gets to a full moon.
Okay.
And we're getting to that point. It's almost a full moon. I think we're like a week out-ish from a full moon. And Blaez is concerned that she'll be attacked, raped, and claimed by a werewolf that she may not want to have that happen with. Valid. So he and his members of his pack are also concerned that because she's a hunter, and the hunters and devoteds are longtime enemies, that she may be actually there to spy on them and can't be trusted. So they question whether she may be a spy and is setting them up for an attack by her pack. She explains what happened to her and that she's not spying or trying to set them up. She's just, trying to make it on her own, basically. Some of the pack members don't believe her or trust her initially, but Blaez does. There's just something, and he's like, no, why would she make this shit up? And so he and his other pack members start looking into her story and trying to figure out, well, what happened to her mother? Why did her dad suddenly, turn out to be kind of a jerk? This type of thing. They discover that her mother was actually murdered, and they eventually figure out who murdered her and why. And I don't want to spoil that because it's kind of a big plot point. They also discover that Kira is special and has sort of like a magical destiny that only her mother knew about. Yeah. Paranormal romance. Okay. Yeah. This is what we got here. From the start, there's an intense physical attraction between Kira and Blaez, and they have a variety of interactions that get increasingly steamier as the story goes on. Given that this is a story about werewolves and how well the author A.C. Arthur explains the animalistic tendencies and urges, it makes sense to me and fits the story. So I didn't mind the spiciness, and it does definitely get pretty spicy. I'd put it at a Scotch bonnet or a habanero. There's a little light bondage at one point, but it's not dangerous or aggressive in any way. There's some masturbation type stuff. So, there was definitely some steamy stuff. And it starts out on the lower end of the steamy and goes to the higher end of the steamy throughout the book. But it was well interspersed with actual plot lines and other elements of the story. They do experience some relationship hurdles along the way, and there is a confrontation at the end of the book, and we learn some surprises about a couple of the key characters. But again, I don't want to spoil it. What I liked about the book, werewolves. It was a refreshing change of pace. We haven't done werewolf smut before.
No, we have not.
And the pacing itself was very good because I finished it in an afternoon, and it actually did have a plot. I kind of wasn't expecting it to, but it did. And there were some nice, steamy, sexy scenes. I loved that Kira is noted as being a healthy size 16. And even though that's not preferred as a norm back in her home pack, and she's kind of treated kind of nastily by her home pack about it, Blaez and his pack help her feel beautiful and appreciated for who she is, and Blaez helps give her confidence in her mind and body. Even though there is a lot of talk of alphas, I never felt like Blaez was being abusively dominant or anything like that, because I sense in just reading and skimming over other werewolf smut that I've been forced upon me on Facebook and other social media areas, that does seem to be like a dominance thing, right? And I wasn't getting that here, and I appreciated that. So again, this was my first werewolf smut. Honestly, my expectations were not super high for it. And to be clear, this isn't probably award-winning smut or a Pulitzer Prize, but I absolutely appreciated it for the fun werewolf romance and soft erotica that it is. And it was a fast read. It did not disappoint in that regard. My only challenge was during the final sex scene of the book. It was quite frankly confusing, and I couldn't tell if they were having anal sex or not, because it wasn't clear. It's not my cup of tea, and I don't want to kink shame if that's your thing. I just honestly couldn't figure out what was happening, and I think that's what bothered me. Is I'm like, what are they doing here? Because there were some ritual elements with the official mating, becoming mates, like putting a scratch on each other's back and licking the blood off, and then this maybe anal sex, not anal sex thing. I couldn't figure it out. That was the only weird thing to me.
I got a couple questions. So starting off, you had the ritual to become mates.
Yes.
Was that the first time that they did it?
No.
Okay, see, so in my book, like if you do it, you became mates. Like that, you're stuck with that person for life. And I literally had to look it up because I'm like, do wolves mate for life? And they do. Like that was a thing. That's a thing I learned. That was one of the things. I was like, my author was going with the very wolfy idea that wolves mate for life. So if you chose this person and you committed the deed, that's it. That's who you're with.
Okay.
So I did appreciate in my book that they were both very cautious about going forward with the mating because they just weren't sure if this was the best idea they'd ever had. And they really wanted to, go slow with that, because otherwise they could be stuck. So I find that really interesting. So that isn't the same throughout the two novels.
No, there was definitely a ritual involved here on a couple of different levels. Again, I think. Still uncertain. Maybe I'll have you read the last couple of pages because I'm like, wait, I don't understand. The biggest part of the ritual was the scratching on each other's backs and the licking it off. And then I think they did have to make a statement out loud, like, you are my mate or something of that nature.
Did they only have sex as humans?
Yes, I think so.
Did they run together as wolves?
I can't divulge that information because it would spoil some things. So,
okay. I only know that in my book, one of the things that they would do after they'd go out on their date would be like, hey, do you want to go run as a wolf? And I'd be like, yeah, let's totally do that. And they would go out and play like little kids. They would just run around and like adventure through the woods and chase stuff and chase each other. And I thought it was actually quite, again, wholesome. For as graphic as this book could get in some of the sex scenes, there was a lot of wholesomeness in the relationships. So for anybody who likes some real good spice, but in a more wholesome context, that's what I had going on, where it sounds like yours had a lot of...
Mine was definitely, I would put in the erotica category.
Yeah.
But not to the extent of Carolina Reaper. The vast majority of the intimate scenes were fairly normal, standard things. It wasn't super in-depth. It was nice, brief scenes. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't excessive. I do have some fun sexual and anatomy references.
Add it to the mons and the feminine folds.
Yep.
Okay, what do you got?
Okay. We have dewy folds.
I don't like that.
so dewy, like a fresh morning.
Gross.
He kept referring to both her ass and her tits as globes. Then there was some bulbous head in reference to the tip of his penis.
What? You've gotten all the books with the bulbous.
The
bulbous
bulbous.
is such a non-sexy word, in my opinion.
I know. I was like, ew, bulbous. No. And then we did have a turgid length of his arousal.
Mm-hmm. I had some thrumming in my book.
Oh, we love some thrumming.
We do love some thrumming.
So, Meghan, boobie prize. Where did your boobies hit?
Oh, definitely much, much later than yours. And this is another one where I thought maybe I had missed it. And I went back and tried to find another reference, and I could not. So mine is page 132.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, this book is mostly wholesome. One of our discussions was whether or not nipple counted. So for me, I have both nipple and breast appearing on page 132. Nipple appears first, but it's his nipple. So then I was going to ask you, what if it's his nipple?
Oh, I think it counts.
Does it?
Well, because if we're going to be reading like LGBTQ plus stuff, like...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So my booby prize, technically his and hers were on the same page. But he came first. She kissed his bare chest and licked a rigid nipple, sending an electric shock straight through to his groin.
Hey.
That was mine, page 132.
That's pretty
and
steamy.
There is no way that I beat you on this one. So what do you got?
Actually, by technicality, because this is the third book in the book.
I like to win on technicality. That does not count.
So technically, boobies hit at page 377, but per this actual individual story, it was actually page 9 of the individual story.
Yes. You can't, I'm not doing the technicalities. If I'm going to win, I want to win for real.
Technically it said page 377, girl.
Nah, that does not work that way. Okay, so page 9 for you. What do you got?
Page 9. Her nipples had grown hard, brushing like tiny spikes over his chest, thighs trembling with the urge to be spread.
Yours is also quite titillating. Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Romantic reminders.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to say the two of these folks wanting to continue being kind and thoughtful and loving to each other. It's going to go back to that quote that I had about her basically saying, even though we're basically married now, I want us to keep doing these things to act like we're dating. So the romantic reminder is just keep dating after you're married. Keep doing those special things. Keep, bringing home the flowers or making reservations or whatever that is to let your loved one know that they are special and that you're not going to stop trying to court them, even though you already are in that committed relationship.
I have to tell you, after being married to my husband, Bob, for quite some time now, well over a decade, and obviously together longer for that if you count in the dating and whatnot. The man sucks at making reservations. He's not great at it. His ADHD brain just does not go there. And on the very rare occasions where I've asked him to make a reservation, he waits too long and then there's no openings available. Or he thinks he's made a reservation, but actually hasn't. So I very much appreciate your romantic reminder. And I can definitely stress in a long-term relationship that it is important to do things like that because it does make your partner feel appreciated and loved. So
keep courting. Keep courting your loved one.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much believe that relationships require maintenance and tending. They can't just be left to sit there because sometimes the weeds will grow or things will collect dust.
Much like your feminine folds.
Mm-hmm. Not my feminine folds, but Yeah. So my romantic reminder would be, don't be afraid to communicate your needs and desires to your partner during intimate moments. That definitely happened multiple occasions in my book. And I felt like it was very helpful in fostering their intimate moments and growing their intimacy and their relationship.
So talking more about the werewolf identity and or trope or whatever we want to call this, like the commonalities between these different books. I'm curious, do they talk at all about how a human would get turned into a werewolf? Is that part of your book at all? And if so, what does that include?
I guess I have to flip that question around back to you for a moment and ask if your people were more like lichens or were they more like wolves when they turned? Does that make sense? Like,
yes, they were wolves. They were wolves when they turned, full-on wolves. So they would go from being humanoid to wolves.
So in my book, they were from humanoids to lichens, which are like a true werewolf in the sense of it still has upright form, just with wolf-like tendencies. But there is somebody who has a special ability who can turn into a wolf. But in this world that Arthur has created, turning into a wolf thing is not the norm.
Interesting. Okay, so in mine, turning into a wolf, you go full wolf. So in order, like if you are going to turn a human into a werewolf, it takes the bite of a werewolf. And I don't know that I've ever heard that before. I don't watch a lot of werewolf things either, though. So maybe that's super common too, that's how a person turns into a werewolf, is getting bitten by a werewolf.
Typically, yeah. Like if you look at Underworld, which some listeners may be familiar with, Underworld is very much it's spread by bite, although there is some descendancy type stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So, sorry, my brain's trying to think this through. It was also very frowned upon to turn someone. Like that was not a thing. If somebody got turned, whoever turned them had made a huge mistake and would probably be in a lot of trouble with their clans. It was not encouraged. The other thing is super long lives.
Okay.
So it was almost like they could live 3 to 7 times longer than a human. So these people have been around for like hundreds of years. And I didn't know if that was a common thing either.
So I will say, as short as this book was and as fast as a read as it was, I have to give A.C. Arthur, the author, props because she explains there's vampires. She explains there's werewolves in juxtaposition to humans. Kind of like a True Blood situation where things have been outed. She talks about there's these long descendancies of the werewolves, and she incorporates Greek mythology of all things. She incorporates Zeus and like the first lichen that Zeus created. And so Blaez's family is like from this Greek descendancy of like these original gods, demigods that were turned into these lichens / werewolves. It does seem like, though, because the generations are limited and this is set contemporary, that there would be longer lifespans. Although that's not directly stated, it's kind of implied.
I'm just interested. So if anybody else has read some werewolf smut that is from other authors and they would like to share what is or is not common with what Nicole and I have discussed, I'm just really curious because I don't know that werewolf romance is going to be one of my go-to categories. It was interesting enough, but I don't know that it's going to be my top rank book, if that makes sense. I did think it had a lot going for it, and I can see how people would really enjoy this series in particular with Terry Spear, and she's written several different werewolf series, so this isn't her only one.
I really like that Terry Spear has the whole Wolf and Plaid thing going on. I mean, I appreciate that there's some historical elements and some actual like plot line.
Yeah, there is something going on there. So I can I can totally see how people will enjoy this.
I myself have always been into like the vampire and werewolf world in terms of I've always liked Anne Rice, her stories. Not all of them, but most of them. And I've liked Underworld, and I've liked a lot of the vampire movies and True Blood. I feel like I'm drawn to this.
You know, I have read a handful of Anne Rice and really enjoyed it. I don't know that werewolves and vampires have ever been like the top of my list for reading fantasy, but I've always read a lot of fantasy. It tended to be a lot more people discovering they had, some sort of magic power or some sort of innate ability. So I do see that for me, romantasy is definitely something I'm going to keep exploring and trying to figure out like what it is that I really like in that category. It just may not be wolves.
Yeah, that's valid. Perfect
reference.
Now that we've hit the paranormal, what else do you want to hit? Do you want to hit some vampire smuts? We talked about hitting the fairy smut. Are we still doing that this year?
We have fairy and vampire stuff. I've got the zombie ones too, man. Like I've got a bunch of them sitting here.
Isn't it like Texas Ranger zombie shit?
I've got like 2 different zombie ones. In fact, I think one of my zombie ones is a Scotland zombie killer. So I could just keep going with the theme. Because if I remember correctly, it's a dude in a kilt with a big gun on the front cover.
Shut up.
I'm serious. So if you want to go for some zombies, man, I got one ready to go.
Before we sign off, one last thing. We have a delightful drinking game. And the way you can get the drinking game is by signing up for our newsletter, of which we don't actually send out a newsletter. At least not yet.
I was saying yet?
Not yet. But basically, you subscribe to our mailing list, and then we email you a very lovely podcast drinking game that you can play along with at home at your leisure. Do check out the forum on our website at romanceontherockspodcast.com and sign up so you can get the drinking game. It's pretty fun.
Well, thank you for joining us today for Romance on the Rocks. Please like, subscribe, and follow. And if you are a hopelessly romantic fellow bookish biddy like us, think about giving us a review on Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you catch your podcasts. Your support really means the world to us. And until next time, stay safe and know that you are loved.